Hey, it's David Hess with the Chattanooga Roost Property Team here today, talk about listing homes. And I'm going to go over kind of like what I do that may be a little bit different than most agents, where I will go to a listing appointment and talk about a range that they could list at, and then kind of the pros and cons about picking the high range or the lower part of the range. So one of the questions I get fairly regularly whenever I'm listing a home is, of course, the seller rather wants the most money they can get, and I come in with a recommendation, and I usually use a range. I'll say, okay, I think this is the bottom of what the market will deliver for you, and this is the potential peak of what you could expect. Of course, we don't have a crystal ball, but I will look at the data and I'll come up with a range. I find that most clients enjoy the range, kind of gives an expectation, if you will. So inevitably, I'm going to be somewhere in the middle of that range, right? That's where I think you should list, especially in the market we're currently in. 2 years ago, you could have listed at the top every time, and you would not have paid much of a penalty if you got it wrong. But in this market, you do pay a heavy penalty if you get the list price wrong. I'll go over some data in a minute. But so inevitably, the seller always says, I want to go for the high number. And then I say, okay, well, here's the risk, all right? If you go for the number and you don't get it in this market, so if you go for the top number and you don't get it, and you have one price reduction, right? So you launch, you can't get your number, so you're like 3 weeks in, you decide to adjust down. Well, the statistics say that if you have one price adjustment, you're going to go from an average of 7 to 10 days on market to about 80 to 90. And you're going to ultimately get a price that's around 8 to 10% below your original list price. Now that's a median, so it's not an average, it's the median. But let's just say you're on a $500,000 house, and you take that 10% off the original list price. That's $50,000. So it's not an insignificant amount. So that's why I tell sellers all the time, it's out of the gate, the number is very important in this market. So if you do get your number, say you sell your house and you didn't have any price adjustments, the statistics say that you're going to sell in 7 to 10 days and for 100% of your asking price or more. And that still holds true. And I see that every day, where if somebody's priced correctly, there'll be multiple offers still in this market. But most people are hanging on to what was going on 2 years ago. They're going for the higher number, even when I explain all the data and kind of paint the landscape for them. They still want to go for the higher number, and that's kind of, as an agent, that's our job. It isn't to make the decision for you, it's to come up with advice on what we would do if we were in your situation. And that's why I like a range, because some people, they want to go for it and they're willing to risk it. And I feel like my duty is just to say, this is the risks if you go for it. Of course, I don't have a crystal ball, you could get it. But another thing that we talk about often when I'm in a listing appointment is, I use this term, the market, we're still in a market that'll balance itself. So you can't really underprice a home. If you come in with a number that's uncomfortably low for you as the seller, I'm going to tell you right now, you're probably going to be more likely to get multiple offers. You're more likely to get the list price, but ultimately it can drive the price up back to where you want it. So an anecdotal a listing I had recently with a seller was, I went in and I gave them the range. I was like, from 650 to 700. 700 is the peak of, I wouldn't go past that point. The data says not good if you go past this. And during that meeting, I said, I think I would list at 675, right in the middle. So that's kind of the range where I thought, that's the number I thought would be optimal to get, potentially drive multiple offers, to get possibly more than what you're asking. And the seller said, well, I've got an appraisal from 4 months ago that says 695. And I said, I'm still at 675. And that was a tough conversation. But what I told him was, after I went over the data and the comps and I provided information, I said, I think you're more likely to get 700 if you list at 675 than if you list at 700. This seller actually listened, and we listed at 675 because speed of sale was important to them. And we wound up getting what the seller wanted. I can't give you a number, but he was very happy, and it was well over 675. That isn't every deal doesn't go that way, but it is more likely to go that way in this market if you price aggressively. I don't mean on the high end. I mean, the closer you move to your discomfort level on the lower end, probably the better results you're going to have. It'll also do other things that are not on the front end. You don't see these numbers when you put the list price on it. So if you have multiple offers, you're more likely to get, buyers who will go above asking. They may probably won't ask for closing costs because if you're in competition, you won't do that. It also can generate backup offers, which when it comes time for inspections, give you leverage. Somebody's less likely to get squirrely in the inspection negotiations if they know you have the backup offer. So it does more than just the frontline number. Even if you get the number where you're at and it doesn't get driven up, you're probably more likely to get the multiples that will then give you better terms that will equal out on your net sheet to more money at the end of the day in your pocket. So I just thought I'd go over that. This is something I hear on a regular basis. And in this market, if you got an agent that's just telling you what you want to hear, absent data to back up their number, you run a real risk. There's a real penalty in this market if you get that number wrong. And if the statistics are significant enough that I think it's worth, paying attention to.